the curtain are several of my colleagues at the center: Susan Merrill O'Connor, our Director of Communications, Kathy Hahn, our Office Administrator, and Caitlin Giles McCormick, our Program Coordinator. We have a lot to cover today, and we'll be going through the information pretty quickly, but we are recording today's briefing, and you'll receive a link to the recording along with the slides and other follow-up information via email. If you have any questions or technical difficulties, please enter your questions into the chat box. Feel free to ask any substantive questions at any time, and if they aren't answered during the course of the presentation, we'll address them if time permits. If we can't get to a question during the web briefing, we'll be sure to follow up afterward. Having a little issue here with the advancing of the slides. There we go. The Center for Nonprofits is New Jersey's state association for the nonprofit community. Since 1982, the center has existed to strengthen New Jersey's nonprofits individually and collectively in order to improve the quality of life for the people of our state. If your organization is a member of the center, we thank you for your support and involvement as we pursue this work together. If you're not a member, we invite you to join us and experience firsthand how membership works for you. We hope you'll stay tuned for a special membership offer at the end of the briefing. The center is also a proud member of the National Council of Nonprofits, the nation's largest nonprofit network, over 25,000 organizations strong. The Council of Nonprofits serves as an advocate, central coordinator, and mobilizer to help nonprofits achieve greater collective impact in local communities across the country. And we, as I said, we are a proud member. And if you are a member of the Center for Nonprofits, you are also a member of the National Council of Nonprofits. Before we begin, I just want to call your attention to some upcoming events that might interest you. The first is the Ultimate Grant Proposal Blueprint, an 8-session on-demand course that starts Monday, March 16th. You can enroll up to 3 members of your team for one price, and members of the center get a deep discount. So for more information about that, please visit our webpage, and the address is on the bottom of the slide. And we hope you will save the date for our annual New Jersey Nonprofit Conference, which will take place on December 2nd in a new location in Freehold. It's the state's largest annual conference for nonprofits and champions, with 650 attendees last year, and is a don't miss opportunity for inspiration, learning, and networking, and we certainly hope we will see you there. Today's webinar attendees represent a diverse array of perspectives, including nonprofits, for-profits, and invited members of the media. I want to thank Sobelco and Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey for generously supporting this year's survey again. And now I'd like to invite Sally Glick, Principal and Chief Growth Strategist at Sobelco and a board member of the Center for Nonprofits, to say a couple of words before we begin. Sally?
Sure. Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. First of all, you stole my thunder. I was going to brag that I'm a board member of the Center for Nonprofits. And on behalf of the firm and our nonprofit team, particularly led by Bridget Hartnett and Ron Matan, we're really honored to be a part of not only the center, but the survey itself. We often feel like we're sitting in the front row seat just watching the activity that the center is doing, the Center for Nonprofits, for our communities, and the way change is affected. We are fortunate, and many of the nonprofits and for-profits don't even realize. You mentioned when you started behind the curtain, people are helping with this program, and behind the curtain, everyone at the center is making things happen and shaping and reshaping the nonprofit community in New Jersey on our behalf. And so you don't always see it, don't always know it. You're not at the forefront, perhaps, because you're doing your job so well that it's quietly done literally behind the scenes. But so much would not be in place without the Center for Nonprofits, and nonprofits themselves, especially the smaller ones, would be so much more vulnerable without a champion for their causes. So I urge everyone who is on this call to, if you've not joined, of course join, but at least visit the website for starters and see the depth of resources that are available and take full advantage of them. These are put there for you, for your own good, for your ability to achieve your mission and for you to impact your own clients in the way that the Center for Nonprofits is having a positive impact on all of us. So we're thrilled that we get to do this survey and be a part, rather, we don't do it, we're a part of it. We sit back and have the Center for Nonprofits does all the work, but we're thrilled to be a part of it. And Linda, thank you so much for all that you've made happen, you and your amazing team. We're very grateful.
Thank you so much, Sally, and thanks to you and everyone at Sobel Co. I'm sure everybody on the call knows how active you are in the community, and we are all grateful and stronger for it. So much appreciation. We're very proud to partner with you. So let's dive in. During the next hour or so, we're going to cover a few broad themes. We're going to just remind people about a little bit of an overview of the nonprofit community here in New Jersey. We'll delve into the meat of the presentation, which will be the highlights of our 2020 survey findings. We'll talk about some other issues that nonprofits are concerned about or may want to be following, and then a few tips or ideas about what we can do. Again, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat box, and if I can get to them at the end, I will do that. If not, if I can't get to it during the presentation, we will certainly follow up afterward with an email to everybody who's registered. So, stating the obvious in this slide, nonprofits matter. We're all on this call, we're all involved with nonprofits or allies of nonprofits because we know that nonprofits make a difference in lives every day, sometimes very, very visibly, and sometimes in ways that people might not necessarily recognize or take for granted. So in every day and in so many ways, lives are being made better because of nonprofits and the work that they do. So when people think about nonprofits, they often think about the really important programs that nonprofits provide. What may not be as obvious or apparent is just how important nonprofits are economically to the well-being of our communities and state and society. There are over 34,000 501c3 nonprofits, that's the charitable, religious, and educational type, in the state of New Jersey, according to the IRS. These organizations collectively employ 324,000 plus people, which is almost 10% of the private workforce and more than a lot of major industries such as construction, transportation, finance, insurance, and others. Nonprofits collectively spend $42 billion in every year, a lot of that in the Garden State. And we also marshal the energies and talents of 1.6 million volunteers who provide services worth in excess of $5 billion. So when we're talking about the economic well-being of the state, we're talking about a strong, thriving New Jersey and a stronger, fairer economy, we also have to think about a strong nonprofit community. So that's kind of the basis, the underpinnings of why the Center for Nonprofits exists, the work that we do, and one of the reasons why we do this survey. We've been conducting an annual issues and trends kind of survey since 2001. We started this actually after the 9/11 attacks because we were concerned about how nonprofits were faring in that very tumultuous environment. And we've kept it going since then. So this is the 20th survey that we've actually done. And as the name implies, it's here to take a pulse of the nonprofit community, find out how nonprofits fared in the year that just finished, find out how they are, what their outlook is for the year ahead, what happened with funding, what kinds of issues are of concern, and we'll be diving into that over the next segment of the session. For anybody who's heard or seen the center's materials or our previous reports, it's not or perhaps experiencing this firsthand, it's not a real surprise that nonprofits are experiencing and have for quite some time an extreme resource squeeze. This is exacerbated by the fact that demand for the services and programs that nonprofits provide and the expenses that nonprofits incur in pursuing their missions are exceeding the funding and the resources that are coming in. This is not a new issue. It is not unique to New Jersey, but it's been happening for quite some time. And the result is a capacity gap, which does threaten the ability of organizations to meet the needs in the community and fulfill their mission and provide services to people who are asking for them. So in terms of this year's survey, this gap is continuing. It's being exacerbated. More nonprofits reported increased demand for services and expenses in 2019 than reported that their funding had gone up. So as you can see on the graph, 71% of our respondents said demand for their services had gone up in the past year. Only 52%, just a little more than half, said their funding had increased, and 58% said that their expenses had gone up. This again is not a new situation. It's been happening year after year and after year. So you can kind of figure out what the cumulative effect of this will be. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that even though 52% of our respondents said expenses did, 52% of our respondents said that funding had gone up, that doesn't mean that funding was sufficient to meet expenses or meet the demand. And indeed, in our survey, only 37% of our respondents reported that they had had a surplus in the last fiscal year. The rest either had a break even, or there were some that also had spent more than they took in. So you could, again, if you go back and you consider 71% increased demand, 58% expense increases, 52% funding, but only 37% that actually were able to take in more than they had to spend. And what are they doing if they spend more than they take in? They're tapping into reserves. They're taking other actions to try to account or adjust for that. So in terms of funding and specific funding sources, this chart delineates a variety of sources of funds for nonprofits, anything from private foundations and corporate donations, individual gifts, fees for service, and on down to a lot of other sources, government and private sources alike. The red segments are the ones that demonstrate where funding actually, how many nonprofits said funding went up. So in terms of private foundations, you'll see from this bar, 30% of our respondents said that their private foundation funding increased in 2019. 12% said that private foundation funding went down, and 38% said that there was no significant change. So what you will see from this graph is that for most sources of funding, flat funding either was equivalent to or outweighed the increased funding. There were some specific exceptions, donations from individuals being the most notable one, where 43% of our respondents said their funding from individuals went up last year, while 36% said that it was steady. Again, this is an aggregate number. So for most of the sources here, we're talking about flat funding being the norm, and that's not new either, but that, again, when you relate it back to the other trends in terms of demand continuing to go up and expenses going up, we're still treading water at best, or still the capacity gap is widening. When we look ahead to the coming year, we asked nonprofits, what do you expect will happen in 2020? This gap is still expected to persist. 75% of the organizations in our survey said that they expected demand to go up. 68% said that expenses would go up, and only 56% said their funding would increase. So again, we're talking about a situation where the capacity gap is not necessarily going to, for the sector as a whole, be relieved in a meaningful way. And in terms of specific outlook regarding specific categories, our respondents were most optimistic about individual gifts, where 53% of our respondents thought that their individual giving was going to rise versus 28% steady funding. Special events was an area where increases and level funding are equivalent in terms of projections by our respondents. And you can see the rest of it, or our respondents also, more of them felt that corporate donations were going to rise compared to the previous year. So this is just a way that we try to track what's happening in terms of different sources of funding. And you can see that in government funding, increases are far outweighed by flat funding or other types of outcomes. Another issue, of course, that we've been tracking since 2017 is the impact of the federal tax law changes, specifically the changes in the standard deduction, which means that you have fewer taxpayers itemizing their on their tax returns, and therefore fewer taxpayers able to take the charitable giving deduction. If you don't itemize on your federal tax returns, the charitable giving deduction is not available to you. And because of the changes to the standard deduction, far fewer people are itemizing than did before this change went into effect. We're talking about a change from perhaps 33% of taxpayers being able to itemize before down to the top 10%. So what's going on with giving? We have some data from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. This is from 2018, and there's some mixed results in here. Total giving, according to Giving USA, a few different sources on this slide, total giving rose by less than 1% in 2018. Once you account for inflation, that is not an increase. Contributions of $1,000 or more increased in 2018, according to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. And over the past 20 years, total giving has, in fact, increased. The problem is once you start to unpack this, it's getting a little bit more dicey. If you look on the right column in the not so good, overall individual giving fell by 1.1% in 2018, and individual giving did not keep pace with inflation, and total giving didn't keep pace with inflation. Significantly, contributions of less than $1,000 dropped by 4%, new gifts dropped by 7%, and second gifts from previous donors, donor retention was also down. The implication here is that donors, the small and mid-sized donors, are feeling the pinch and not giving as much, and that's a huge concern to most of the nonprofit community, the small and mid-sized organizations that comprise most of our sector and are dependent on those kinds of gifts for the lifeblood of their work. The 2019 data that we could find is only through September 30th. I have not seen data for the rest of the year, but again, according to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, there's cause for concern here as well, that giving was down in 2019 compared to 2018, and donor retention was also down. Well, it'd be interesting to see what happened in the last quarter, because we know the last quarter is so active for giving. What does this mean in New Jersey? We don't have giving data for New Jersey. What we have, the most recent data we have, is charitable deduction data from 2017. That was the last year before the new tax law took effect. What's important to keep in mind here is that nearly half of households that itemized and took charitable contributions in 2017 had incomes of under $100,000, and they gave $1.5 billion to charity. That's nearly a quarter of all claimed gifts. 4/5 of itemized deductions for charitable contributions were taken by households with incomes of under $200,000, and they donated nearly half of all claimed gifts. A lot of these folks are not itemizing anymore. So the concern, of course, is that giving has been affected, and we've certainly heard anecdotally from our survey responses that that is in fact happening. What this also speaks to, we know, of course, that there's a profound wealth gap in this country in terms of the population, and that's also starting to, it's been manifesting itself in the nonprofit community. So those organizations that are able to connect with and receive gifts from donors who can continue to itemize, that can take advantage of certain tax incentives, may have a little bit more flexibility in terms of their financial outcomes than other organizations that might not have access to those kinds of resources. So it's a trend that we're very much concerned about. In our survey, we also ask organizations, what are your top trends? What are your top issues, challenges? We ask this in two ways. We provide a list of issues and concerns pertaining to individual organizations, and we also ask regarding the nonprofit community. So first, regarding the top challenges facing individual nonprofits, These are pretty consistent themes. They may jockey for position in terms of what's number one, two, three, etc. But a lot of this has to do with infrastructure, affordability, making sure the organization is strong. So you'll see this year at the top of the list is the need for good branding and communications, being able to tell the story about how well the organization is doing and how it accomplishes its mission, making sure you're presenting yourself in the best possible way. The need for a stronger board was number two this year. There are other years when it comes in at number one. Financial security is also frequently in the top three and certainly in the top five. Rounding out some of the top issues, issues related to employment, the ability to attract and afford good staff, the cost of benefits, the cost of um, being able to attract and retain a good team. Additionally, some infrastructure and planning issues regarding strategic planning, the desire to increase organizational stability, visibility rather, and the increased demand for services that we've just been talking about. That was identified as one of the top issues by about a third of our respondents. When we shift gears and ask people to think about the nonprofit community as a whole, there are some consistent themes, but things do change a little bit. Infrastructure capacity building was identified as a top issue by nearly 60% of our respondents. Foundation and corporate funding and attracting good, strong boards were identified by half of our respondents. Rounding out some of these, the issues identified for the nonprofit community as a whole, again, attracting and retaining a good workforce, giving and volunteering incentives, again, the tax laws on people's minds, and making sure that it is attractive and cost effective for people to give to charity. Diversity and equity in nonprofits was identified as a concern by 31% of our respondents. And rounding out the need to improve the understanding about nonprofits, again, telling that story about the economic importance, the impact that nonprofits have in our communities, and the difference that nonprofits make. And fiscal policy, government policy in terms of state budgets was also rounding out some of our top concerns. We also asked people to provide some open-ended observations, and people talked about a lot of different things, and these are just some of the common themes that recurred more than once. Impact about the tax law. Organizations that receive funding from government are very concerned about the escalating costs of complying with those contracts. Administrative costs regarding some of foundation and corporate grants. Some people were saying that those administrative requirements are also on the rise. Staff retention, the cost of the recent employment law changes. There have been some very significant employment law changes in the state within the past year and a half, 2 years, and organizations are trying to adapt to those and make sure that they can afford to implement them. Very, very strong concern about the impact of federal policies on vulnerable people, immigrants, and others, and the overarching need to strengthen relationships with policymakers, local, state, federal, elected officials, and otherwise. These were all very common themes. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about diversity and equity in the nonprofit community. We all know how vitally important it is to ensure that we are leading with our values, and that includes ensuring that our boards are diverse and representative of the communities we serve, and that our staff members are reflective of the communities that we serve, and that we have racial and ethnic and other forms of diversity reflected on our teams. The data are there in terms of how important this is for organizational effectiveness. And as nonprofits, we have an imperative to do the right thing. There's people on this call don't need me to talk about how important it is, but we know that it is. But unfortunately, as we found in the nonprofit diversity report that we published in the fall, in New Jersey, we have a lot of work to do. Similar to across the country, CEO, executive spots, and boards of nonprofits are overwhelmingly white, despite the fact that our population in New Jersey is one of the most diverse in the country. This, again, is not unique to New Jersey. It's probably for many people not surprising, but it is very concerning, and it just shows that there's a lot of work to be done. We do hope that you will share your um, the what you're doing, what you're seeing, good resources, or your questions or whatnot. We are working with partners to try to um, advance diversity and equity in the nonprofit community in New Jersey, and we'd like to make sure that we're connecting people to the best possible resources. So we hope that you will keep this conversation going and will tell us what you're doing or what you need so that we can help in the most appropriate way, because this is obviously a critical need. What I will say is that when in our top 5 issues that we were just talking about, identified by the nonprofit community, 31% of our respondents identified diversity and equity as a top issue for the nonprofit community. 23%, nearly a quarter, identified diversity and equity, cultural competence as a top issue for their organizations. I will tell you that is an increase over the last year's survey, when I believe the percentages were something like 24 and 14% respectively. So organizations are very much attuned to this and aware that they need to that they want to make sure that this is an issue that is a priority, and not beyond a priority. This is infused in a very deliberate way throughout the organization's mission and practices. We also asked organizations how your circumstances changed. Are you better off than you were a year ago? And a year from now, where do you think you'll be? So this graph demonstrates over the last 10 years, 11 years, since 2008, how those trends have been happening. In 2008, of course, we had the financial collapse. So you'll see that optimism was not very high. As you track across to 2019, 61% of our respondents said that their circumstances were better than they were a year ago. And so that's certainly encouraging. And that's a bright spot in some of the trends that we're seeing. Now, it could be, in some cases, it might just be slightly better, and some it could be significantly. But the fact that we've got a significant portion of our respondents that say, things are looking up a little bit is certainly hopeful. We also asked, what do you think the coming year is going to bring? These dotted lines reflect the projections that people gave for any year in question. So if you go all the way to the right to 2020, 61% again felt that their circumstances would continue to improve in 2020 over the year that just passed. So again, that's a bright spot in the report. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty. There were a lot of organizations that were not comfortable predicting what their circumstance was going to be like, but still, it's an illustrative trend. When you put this together, how good are nonprofits at predicting what their situation is going to be? You end up with a slide that kind of looks like the subway, but you'll see that the nonprofits, with the notable exception of the financial collapse between 2008 and 2009, have been pretty good about tracking the trends. So that when nonprofits say that their circumstances are going to improve, by and large, that does happen. Similarly with decreases and no change is a little bit in between, of course. But again, it's helpful to just show what the mindset is of nonprofits. It's a little bit of a confidence indicator. And again, one bright spot, one sign of hope in our report is the fact that right now, the confidence or the optimism is a little bit higher. And in fact, in 2019, more nonprofits said that their circumstances were actually better than even predicted that they were going to be. So what are nonprofits doing about all this? The steps that nonprofits are taking probably seem pretty straightforward. Many of the organizations in our survey are seeking new and alternative revenues, trying to find funds from other sources, increasing their volunteer recruitment, boosting their advocacy on behalf of their organizations and their constituencies, collaborations. plus of our organizational respondents said that they launched new collaborations in the past year, and some really interesting things going on, and we have some examples in the report. Program adjustments, adjusting their budgets. Nonprofits are very nimble, and the volatile circumstances that we're in right now, kind of force that. But nonprofits have always been very creative and very nimble. Special events, that's one of the areas where more organizations than not recorded a pretty positive outcome. So it's no surprise that organizations are still doing special events. Some of our corporate partners have some concerns about that, but again, when nonprofits are needing to find revenue sources from all sorts of places, and the other thing I will say on special events is more organizations are also collaborating and doing them together, so that's obviously a positive sign as well. So what else can we do? There's a lot that we can do, and there's a lot at stake because, as we know, New Jersey needs a strong nonprofit community. If you give some thought as to what would happen in our communities or in our state if nonprofits weren't there, it would be a pretty dire circumstance. Government can't do its job alone, and in fact, government has offloaded a lot of its responsibilities for providing services onto the nonprofit community. Again, not necessarily with sufficient resources, but when you think about everything that nonprofits do and the economic importance of nonprofits, it's really important again, and it's worth underscoring how important nonprofits are for a strong New Jersey. So in terms of things that can be done, and some of this is individual from an individual organization lens, and some of this is what we can do together as a community. And these are divided into a few broad themes. Planning, again, be proactive about your planning. Make sure that you've got your business plans, strategic plans, and whatnot up to date, and make sure that you're involving your stakeholders, your board, and others from the outset. Your planning will be much, much better informed, and you will be a much stronger organization for that effort. If you haven't done it lately, make sure that you take the time to analyze your programs from a cost benefit perspective as well as from a community need perspective. What's core to your mission? What is absolutely essential that you cannot let go of? Are there gaps in the community that you need to be pursuing, shifts that you, in terms of the constituencies that you serve or how you are providing your services? We all know that populations are changing, needs are becoming more complex. Are there other opportunities that can be pursued, and are there things that you need to let go of? Again, being nimble and being flexible and adaptable involves making sure that you've got the best possible information about the environment in which you're working. If you haven't, obviously, it's critical to keep an eye on your finances. If your revenue sources are diversified, do you have a cash reserve? Where are the opportunities for growth and where are the vulnerabilities? If 80% of your funding comes from a single source and that's a vulnerable source, then you need to have contingencies plans in place as to what happens if that source gets jeopardized in some way. So again, these are things that you can work on with your board, with your financial team, and we can also connect you to some resources and tools to assist on that. Again, some of this is very, very straightforward, not necessarily rocket science. In terms of fundraising and communications, make sure you know and understand your stakeholders. We just got done talking about the fact that only 10% of donors right now are able to take advantage of the charitable giving deduction. So if you you need to know who your donors are and if that is an option for them, if tax incentives are available to them. If not, then you really can't be emphasizing that kind of opportunity if it doesn't exist. But beyond that, you're trying to build relationships. So relationships are absolutely key. That is not new either, but especially now when this relationship and the engagement with your donors and your stakeholders can't just be transactional. You want people to be invested in psychologically and financially in your organization. So they will help to spread the good word about your work and make sure that you're staying in touch with your donors, with your funders. Be frank about what your situation is. Certainly on the grant making side, funders want to hear what's going on, and they can't do anything to try to assist or address your situation or your needs if they don't know about it. So communicate, 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 and find other ways to generate support. There's more than just money that is available, of course, by in-kind and skills-based volunteers and other kinds of things. It bears repeating, if you have not engaged in, we know that everybody is in a different place on the journey to ensure that their organizations and their missions are reflecting good values of diversity and equity and justice. As nonprofits, we believe we have a responsibility to do that, but it's a learning process and the learning never ends. But it starts with a good, strong board commitment and board recruitment, retention, and governance, but it also pertains to leadership pathways, mentoring, making sure that your programs and your operations internally are diverse, culturally competent, and free of bias to the greatest extent possible. Again, this is it's hard work, it takes time, it takes a strong commitment and a deliberative approach, but it's absolutely essential, and your organization is stronger for having done that. On the compliance end, do some basic things. Make sure that you understand the recent personnel and employment law changes that have been enacted. There have been a lot of them: minimum wage, pay equity, earned sick leave, changes in the overtime laws, making sure that your staff or your personnel are classified appropriately as employees versus independent contractors, and that you understand the difference. Consult an attorney if you need to. Pro bono partnership is an excellent resource on this. And double check your withholdings as well, to make sure that things are not under withheld, and that those withholdings are taking place appropriately. If you are considering staff changes, either adding or reducing staff, make sure that you know that you're doing this in an appropriate way and a non-discriminatory way. Also, make sure that you're weighing short-term savings against longer-term risks, and talk to an attorney. Again, I cannot say that strongly enough. Stretching resources. Again, in a time of financial uncertainty, it's always important, and even when times are not quite so tight, it's always important to make sure that we are good stewards of the resources that we have, and that we are spending them appropriately, and that we stretch them where we can. So if you haven't comparison shopped for key purchase items, insurance and equipment and the like, do that. It's always a good exercise. If you are a member of your subsector association, or if you're a member of the Center for Nonprofits, thank you if you are, there are discounts to be had, member benefits that will help you to stretch those resources. So if you haven't checked into your member benefits lately, do that, because there's a lot of opportunity there. Obviously, collaborating, pooling resources with other entities, a lot of that is happening. I personally think nonprofits get a bad rap in terms of the perception that they don't collaborate as much as they do. And when it's appropriate, strategic alliances, strategic collaborations, possibly up to and including mergers where it makes sense to do so. So there are a lot of ways that you can look at stretching resources. So those are just a few on the individual side of things. Undoubtedly, you have done or can suggest many, many others, but these are just some food for thought. On the collective end of things, wouldn't be a Center for Nonprofits presentation, or at least not one by me, unless we talked about advocacy. And advocacy is more important than ever. When we're talking about the environment and the climate that we as nonprofits are operating under, we have the potential and the opportunity, and arguably the responsibility, to change that, or to have a voice in the policies that are affecting us and affecting the people and the constituencies that are relying on us. And if policymakers are not hearing from us, they are missing out on our unique perspectives, and there are certain viewpoints that are not being represented. So there's every reason in the world to do that, not only in terms of legislative work, but also regulatory and nonpartisan voter engagement. No big secret, there's an election coming up this year, but there's also an important election coming up next year. And there are ways that nonprofits can be involved in a nonpartisan way. One specific piece of legislation that the Center for Nonprofits is working very, very hard to pass, actually there are two, charitable giving incentive bills. They have been reintroduced in Congress that would restore a non-itemizer charitable giving deduction, which means you wouldn't have to itemize in order to take a charitable deduction for your gifts. We know that there is a connection between a charitable giving incentive and sometimes whether people give, often by how much they can give. Clearly, with a tax incentive, you can afford to give more than if that's not available to you. But also in New Jersey is one of the minority of states that do not have any form of state level charitable giving incentive. And because the federal one is a particularly heavy lift that's going to take time and work, and we are committed to it, but we think it's very, very important to pass a charitable giving incentive here in New Jersey. New Jerseyans have been hit very hard by the tax law with the cap on state and local tax deductions, also known as SALT, and just because we are such a high cost of living state. There is legislation that is going to be reintroduced. We worked very hard on it last year. It passed the Senate unanimously, and we weren't able to get it through the Assembly, but stay tuned because this is a very, very important bill, and we will be asking for your help in terms of making sure that we can get the Assembly to pass it, because this is an investment in the nonprofit community and for the benefit of our entire state. We will definitely be sharing more information about that, so we encourage you to stay in touch with us and we will keep you posted. As you all know, the census is right around the corner. In just a few weeks, the census will launch here in New Jersey. It is already underway in Alaska, but in other states it launches a little bit later. It's impossible to overstate how important the census is. And I know that many of you on this briefing are already very, very involved on the local level in ensuring that we get out the count in New Jersey and that New Jersey has a full, complete, fair, and accurate count. Just to put a finer point on it, there's so much at stake, from funding for critical programs, billions and billions of dollars here in New Jersey. Electoral representation. After the last census, we lost a congressional seat. That means our power and our clout in DC is diminished if we aren't fully counted. And New Jersey has a fair amount of communities that are considered, with populations that are considered hard to count. So there's a lot more information available. If you're not aware of the fabulous work that Advocates for Children of New Jersey is doing in coordinating a lot of this work in New Jersey, visit their website, census2020nj.org, and you'll find tips and tools and worksheets and information about how to build a kiosk and all sorts of things like that, and much, much more. Again, cannot underscore how enough how important this is. So those are some of the main trends, themes, but there are also ways that we hope that you will be involved with the Center for Nonprofits as we work to advocate for nonprofits, as we work to serve you so that you can fulfill your mission more effectively or perhaps a little more easily. I mentioned at the top of the hour that we were going to have a special offer, and here it is, just in time for Leap Day. We hope you will take the leap, and it's a short leap. It's a pretty straightforward kind of thing to do, we hope. Join the Center for Nonprofits. If you are not already a member, we can offer you 10% off your dues if you join using the code LEAPDAY by March 1st. If you want another little incentive, not only is February 29th Leap Day, but February 27th is apparently National No-Brainer Day. So who knew? But we'd like to think that a decision to join the center and support your organization by virtue of the programs we provide is something of a straightforward decision for you. Even more exciting than that, we are going to be launching, and in fact have taped the first episode of a new television show in partnership with Princeton Community Television, but it will air initially on Princeton Community TV, but then we will be streaming it on other channels as well, YouTube and Vimeo and the like. We are going to be taping these on a regular basis to cover important issues facing nonprofits. The show is called Nonprofits Front and Center, and my colleague Susan O'Connor, pictured on the right in this picture, along with Doug Schoenberger, our government affairs specialist, and me in the middle. We taped the first episode just last week, and that'll be airing shortly. We'll be talking about all sorts of issues and topics of concern to the nonprofit community. So we hope you will stay tuned. We'll be pushing these out by social media. Our first segment will be covering basics about the nonprofit community. The second segment will cover the 2020 census, and we are building our agenda as we speak. So if you have topic ideas, we want to hear from you. Please send them our way. You can email them to us, and we would love to take a look. Speaking of email lists, there are a lot of different ways in which you can stay involved with our activities. We hope you'll join our email list and follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We're very active, again, thanks to my colleague Susan. And a lot of times that's the way you'll hear about certain things first. We share a lot of what other organizations are doing, so we want to make sure that other people know about your good works. And we also share breaking news and whatnot on, sometimes they reach the social media feeds before they reach the email or the website. So we hope you will stay in touch that way as well, and keep these conversations going. The report, again, is New Jersey Nonprofits Trends and Outlook for 2020. It's available, or will be available, as soon as this web briefing is concluded, on our website at njnonprofits.org. After the conclusion of the webinar, we will also be sending a follow-up email that will include links to other resources, a link to the report, and a copy of the slides that we have put out for today's session. We do hope that you found today's session valuable. We've only scratched the surface, obviously, of what nonprofits are facing in today's environment. And there's so many other issues that the Center for Nonprofits is following and working on, researching, advocating in order to make New Jersey an environment where nonprofits can thrive, and in order to make your job as nonprofits a little bit easier. So we hope that you will stay involved, that you'll give us your feedback. If you're not seeing something that you're looking for by way of services or an issue, please let us know, because this only works if we communicate together. I don't know if we had any questions in the chat box. I'm going to check that quickly. And seeing none, I think we are in good shape here. Would like to thank again my colleagues, Susan, Kathy, and Caitlin, for helping out behind the scenes. Many, many thanks to Sobel Co. and Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey for supporting the survey again this year. Above all, thanks to all of you for joining us today and for the work that you're doing to make our communities and New Jersey better. We do hope that you'll stay in touch, and thank you so much for spending the time with us today.